Why the Freedom Convoy failed to gain favour. 2/3 of Canadians cheered on war powers. Canada, a purportedly liberal nation of tolerance, turned into a dystopia during the COVID-19 outbreak. Under the guise of public safety, government officials showed their totalitarian proclivities. In addition to lockdowns and quarantines, discriminatory and invasive vaccine mandates impeded people from studying, traveling, visiting relatives, and working. Mass resistance from truckers revealed the gun in the room, the coercion and the willingness of those in power to censor and vilify anyone who dared to defy the dictates. These truckers enjoyed enormous attention around the world and generous bottom-up support. Unfortunately, they failed to persuade government officials or win the hearts of Canadians at large. The convoy's origins. Neither the United States nor Canada suspended trade in goods during the COVID-19 outbreak. However, in November 2021, both countries announced vaccination mandates for truck drivers. Rules took effect in Canada on January 15, 2022. Canada forbade foreign truckers from entering the country unless they were fully vaccinated. Unvaccinated Canadian truckers had to show a negative COVID-19 test taken within 72 hours of reaching the border and then quarantine for 14 days, which made cross-border work impractical. On January 22, the United States started asking non-citizens entering the country to show proof of vaccination at land border crossings. U.S. citizens and permanent residents were exempt. Official figures indicated that 85% of Canadian truck drivers were fully vaccinated by mid-January. However, only half of U.S. drivers had 2 shots of COVID-19 vaccines. The mandates left many thousands of Canadian and U.S. truckers ineligible for cross-border transport. This mandate rubbed salt into the wound of already strained supply chains in Canada. Amid COVID-19, supply chains struggled with worker shortages and transportation bottlenecks. According to the Canadian Trucking Alliance, the truck driver shortage was 20,000 in 2021. In the United States in 2021, the American Trucking Associations revealed there were 80,000 vacant truck driver positions. The civil disobedience strategy. On January 22, 2022, truckers formed convoys in several Canadian cities, later replicated in the United States, to demand that the federal government revoke the border vaccination mandate. The truckers converged on Ottawa on January 29 with a peaceful protest at Parliament Hill and a de facto road closure. According to the Ottawa Police Service, 15,000 people crowded the core of the capital city at the rally's peak. In what was a party-like atmosphere, nearly 1,000 trucks occupied the streets. Protesters announced they would not move until officials lifted the mandate. Simultaneously, offshoot protests occurred in provincial capitals, and some truckers and allies blockaded border crossings with the United States. A January 26 statement from the Truckers Coalition said, quote, "Freedom is constantly at war with those who want to limit it, and it must be defended," unquote. This claim invited others to join the protest if they had not already. Many people went to the streets to protest other vaccine mandates and various COVID-19 measures such as lockdowns. The convoy became a broad freedom movement. On February 7 to 14, protesters inspired by the Freedom Convoy blocked the Ambassador Bridge. Connecting Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario, this is the busiest trade corridor between the United States and Canada. The 7-day blockade curtailed production on the Canadian side of the border. For example, Ford shut down its engine plant in Windsor, right on the border, and reduced the operations of its Oakesville assembly plant near Toronto. Toyota, General Motors, and other car companies also announced shutdowns, since Canadian automakers import most parts from the United States. Quote, "This interruption on the Detroit-Windsor Bridge hurts customers, auto workers, suppliers, communities, and companies on both sides of the border," unquote, Ford said in a statement. A study by the Anderson Economic Group estimated that automakers with assembly plants in the region suffered a loss of US $155 million. Ottawa uses war powers, financial censorship. There was to be no dialogue or backing down from Ottawa. The Prime Minister declared himself infected with COVID-19 and cowardly isolated himself from those who opposed his mandates. During the 23-day protest in Ottawa, police arrested more than 200 people and filed around 500 criminal charges. Charges laid against protesters included 6 for assault, 11 for weapon possession, 200 for mischief, 112 for obstructing a police officer, and 87 for disobeying a court order. Officers also towed 115 vehicles blocking the streets. Regarding the blockade at the Ambassador Bridge, a judge ruled on February 11 that the police could forcibly remove protesters. Officers started moving people one day later, and by February 15 they had arrested 46 people and towed 37 vehicles. The Ontario Transportation Ministry revoked driver's licenses of protesters who participated in Ottawa and at the Ambassador Bridge. Simple law enforcement, to be expected, was just the start. The Liberal Party leadership declared a state of emergency on February 11, invoking war powers, euphemistically called the Emergencies Act, and resorted to unlawful and unnecessary measures against protesters and their supporters. This occurred without any request from the police for the Emergencies Act. Brian Peckford, the last living author of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, vehemently rejected the use of the Emergencies Act. For him, invoking what was previously known as the War Measures Act was unnecessary for tackling the protests. Quote, "We're at a very historic moment in our history to see this act being invoked for the first time against peaceful demonstration and civil disobedience," unquote. To finance the convoy, organizers launched a petition on GoFundMe on January 14. With huge success, they raised over $10 million for approximately 120,000 donors by February 2. Canadian financial authorities, however, requested GoFundMe, other crowdfunding websites, and payment processors to share data and identification details regarding donations. After releasing the first $1 million, GoFundMe removed the campaign permanently on February 4. GoFundMe explained that the protests violated its rules on violence and harassment. However, 8 days prior, the platform had greenlighted the initial disbursement after learning the fund's distribution plan. In the same vein, on February 10, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice granted a court order against GiveSendGo. The platform had to freeze the funds for 2 campaigns, Freedom Convoy 2022 and Adopt a Trucker, which raised US $8.4 million and US $686,000 respectively. On February 14, the Justin Trudeau cabinet froze around 210 bank accounts of people associated with or who donated to the convoy and a payment processor with $3.8 million of funds. Ottawa also suspended transactions involving 253 cryptocurrency wallet addresses. On February 21, federal officials supposedly unlocked the financial accounts, although some accounts remained frozen months later. 2 days later, on February 23, Trudeau lifted the public order emergency before the Senate could overrule it. Regime media deliver attention, no sympathy. For David Mayer, a political science professor at the University of California, San Diego, social disruption is effective when it gets other people to pay attention. With a captive audience, protests then need to persuade the broader public of their cause, and this is where the Freedom Convoy faltered. In Canada, 90% of the population and 86% of truck drivers were fully vaccinated by February 2022. Although many people went to the streets to protest rigid COVID-19 mandates, they were far from a majority. 2/3 of the population supported the state of emergency declaration in response to the disruption. Moreover, 57% of Canadians associated the Freedom Convoy with far-right politics and not with the working class struggling economically due to lockdowns and mandates. There is little way to overstate the deception of Canada's regime media and their pernicious role in this scenario, ensuring, quote, conformity with every article of progressive ideological doctrine, unquote, as explained by Harley Price of the University of Toronto. Billboard Chris Elston, an activist against sex reassignment for minors, summed it up well on the Canadian Conservative podcast, quote, there is a media blackout on truth, unquote. Anyone consuming citizen journalism or independent media, such as the Western Standard, Press for Truth, the Post-Millennial, or Rebel News, receives a counter-narrative relative to coverage paid for by Ottawa. For an in-depth assessment of the media's role in promoting the regime narrative during the COVID-19 era, I recommend the Manipulation Check videocast series by psychology professors Daniel Smilik of the University of Waterloo and Jeffrey Spence of the University of Guelph. One episode, a discussion with Professor of Journalism David Haskell of Wilfrid Laurier University, laid waste to Canadian media and some public institutions. Haskell noted, for example, that Ottawa officials had turned off closed-circuit cameras or put them on a repeating loop so the public could not get raw footage of the peaceful protest. Quote, "The government, the people in power right now, don't want you to know what's actually happening. They want their narrative to triumph if they are going to harm these people who are in downtown Ottawa. They have to convince the public that these people are worthy of harm. They can't let you see the diversity, the unity," unquote. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms on February 4, 2022, sent a letter to the Ottawa mayor requesting the cameras be turned back on. Non-participants had to turn to social media or conventional media outlets that spun the story. Regime media focused on obvious agents provocateurs, such as a face-covered man holding a Confederate battle flag with a truck on it. Other protesters asked the man to leave, and he stayed just long enough for the sought-after photo opportunity and distraction. Smilik said he was so concerned about the media disconnect and vitriolic name-calling that he drove 5 hours from Waterloo to Ottawa to see the protest for himself. Quote, "It was something that was completely contradictory to the Trudeau media narrative, because I saw all sorts of people there of different colors, ages, socioeconomic statuses. I even saw people in wheelchairs, people with walkers, complete diversity. You had bouncy castles, kids playing there, people dancing in the street, Canadian flags all over the place. The francophones, the English-speaking, the Indigenous playing drums. Everybody was celebrating freedom and asking for their freedoms back. I personally now have experienced that stark contrast and disconnect between the mainstream narrative and reality," unquote. Anti-democratic taxpayer funding starts with the CBC, which took $1.14 billion in 2021 to 2022 and covers essentially all legacy outlets. The latter receive $600 million annually as a bailout from the federal government and have to get approval as legitimate and respectable from a partisan board of advisors. As sovereigntist author Corey Morgan notes, quote, "They will never bite the hands that feed them," unquote. Sadly, even supposedly conservative newspapers such as the National Post and Toronto Sun, part of the Post Media Network, went cap in hand for tens of millions of dollars in bailouts. National Post founder Conrad Black, in what appears to be an act of humiliation, since he knows better, defended the, quote, "investment by the public sector in Canadian media," unquote. To make matters worse, at the outset of the COVID-19 spread, there was a $60.8 million emergency relief subsidy for undisclosed media outlets. The recipients, as found by Blacklock's reporter, had to agree to disseminate the government's messages. According to Stephen Guilbeault, then Minister of Canadian Heritage, the grants ensured readers got, quote, "timely information they required from their government," unquote. You can see what Canadian independent thinkers and protesters, including the Convoy, are up against. Unfortunately, given disparate coverage between independent and state-sponsored media, the Convoy hardened divisions between Canadians and did not find common ground. In the eyes of the protesters and their supporters, the Convoy revealed the caustic relationship between the people and their government. The Convoy also revealed Canadian legacy media to be bought off. Amateurs learn politics the hard way. The Convoy participants were, in general, working-class political outsiders, which added to their populist appeal in specific quarters. They opposed incumbents at all levels of government, but especially the Liberal Party establishment in Ottawa. Despite grave personal sacrifice, the participants found little love in the Conservative Party and failed to convert their energy into substantive changes. Ironically, one man to fall in the Convoy's wake, now former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney of the United Conservative Party, was slightly less draconian than his peers in other provinces. However, grassroots discontent was so strong that his own party ousted him. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who took office in October 2022, moved swiftly to end any trace of vaccine mandates, even from private organizations. Smith's ascension to the UCP helm, with a clear stance against COVID-19 authoritarianism, is one of the only bright spots tangentially related to the Convoy. The Convoy's broader struggles, coming away with nothing at the federal level, emphasized the need to energize a free press, with censorship-resistant crowdfunding and social media, and oppose all state-funded media. So long as most media outlets are in the pocket of Ottawa, persuading their audiences of anything against the regime's interests will be an uphill battle. It is akin to trying to teach anarcho-capitalism in government schools run by public sector unions. Freedom-minded Canadians would do well to garner more leverage over the Conservative Party. That could be through 1, supporting the classical Liberal People's Party of Maxime Bernier as an alternative, or 2, infiltrating the Conservative Party and ousting the spineless hacks who occupy its highest ranks. The People's Party was the lone voice against COVID-19 mandates, but it failed to win a single seat in the 2021 federal election. Devoting one's time to political activism, though, can be a trap, as noted by Harry Brown in How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, 1973. Brown was an intellectual inspiration to me during my undergraduate years at Boston University, after I heard his 2004 lecture at the Foundation for Economic Education. He passed away in 2006. Quote, "It's not surprising that most people turn first to government whenever they become concerned about their freedom. They waste a great deal of their freedom working to affect the government through voting, politics, educating others, protesting, etc." Unquote. Brown meant that people often mistakenly spend their precious resources trying to change government when they would be better off allocating those resources to their own lives and going around government. One of Brown's brilliant acolytes, lawyer Jim Ostrovsky, has described a smarter approach as direct citizen action. In particular, Ostrovsky advocates opting out of government education and moving to more favorable jurisdictions, voting with your dollars, eyeballs, and feet. The second section of this book addresses many non-political actions you can take to reclaim your freedom in the Canadian context.